privilege of reading your book before it was actually published. And I want to encourage everybody to buy a copy because it's delightful, and Angela's here to sign it. But you talk about leadership in relationship to the personal, organizational, and transformative. I wonder if you could reflect on that in your career for our scholars and fellows.
Well, as anybody who's heard me talk about leadership in the context of orchestrating a career, my own view of leadership is shaped by what have been the three big movements in the leadership literature. The focus on the development of the person and personal qualities. I think around personal qualities, the three that I value the most, one of them is being honest with yourself about your strengths and your limitations. And again, I will say what you've heard me say before. You want to focus on your strengths, you want to develop them, and you want to become very good friends with people who are good in areas that are not your strength, so that you actually collectively can achieve something bigger. I think one of the most important things personally is to get clear about your values, because whenever you're in doubt about how to proceed, either as a scientist, as an administrator, as an educator, to always think through what are your core values in this situation and focus on values. Because people, when you focus on values, it's not a personal thing, it's beyond you. Like when nurses focus on values, they focus typically on the needs of the patient, the family, the community. And that gets away from you arguing for your profession, so that's smart. I'm a great believer in persistence. If you ever took a class from me during the years I was teaching in terms of research development, I would do a whole class on preparing for failure, expecting failure, the Teach for America has done work, and it's come out in the last year, on what makes the best teachers. And they have found out that the best predictor of the best teachers is persistence. That is, finding a story in somebody's life where something negative happened and they persisted. And people who persist then work with other people to persist. So anyway, I think there are a number of attributes to cultivate. But if you are personally charismatic, or if you're personally passionate, that doesn't necessarily translate into goal attainment. And all of us work in institutions where we really have to facilitate people achieving the mission and the goals of the institution. And that really calls for a certain amount of instrumental abilities, certain communication abilities, resource development, team building. So when it comes to goal attainment, how you, my first chapter in the section on leadership as achieving organizational goals is a chapter called Knowing What You Do. Now that sounds pretty simplistic, but I think most nurses don't know what they do for the organization. What is their responsibility? Or if they do, they use the language of nursing. Like if you go to a CEO and say, you've got to be nicer to nursing than you are, the CEO glazes over because the CEO doesn't really care to be nice to medicine, nursing, social work, or pharmacy. The CEO just wants the work of the organization to go. Where if you go and say to someone, 4 papers for that annual meeting, and I was asked to do the one on nursing education. And the requirement was to look back 25 years to talk about what had been accomplished and to project 25 years to what do you think is going to happen in nursing education going forward. That paper was eventually published in Nursing Outlook, and Ursula Springer got a hold of me saying this would make a good book. And so I began the book thinking that I was going to focus on, I knew I wanted to do leadership, and I thought I was going to do leadership in academic nursing. Vernice Ferguson, and I don't know if any of you people know, she's a living legend. She was the chief nurse for the VA system. She was at Penn for a number of years with an endowed chair in terms of diversity, just a phenomenal person. But she kept pushing me, saying, I listen to you, Angela, and you've got to write a broader book. So really spurred on by Vernice, I decided to actually write a book on leadership that was what I thought were key things that didn't matter what setting you were in. So that, and you know, it'll be interesting your response, because I don't know that I've succeeded. You know, on my good days I thought I did, and on my bad days I wrote the review saying how bad the book was. So I don't know, my head is full of 2 different versions of reviews. But I thought there was a real need for a book that was, in case you don't have a mentor, sort of conversational with you about key issues of leadership. You know, in that first chapter, I talk a lot about how hard it is to be a leader. I am revelatory in places. You know, I end the introduction by saying the authority for this book in some places comes from having been successful, and some of the authority comes from not having been successful, and really learning from your mistakes. And so I wanted to do something that was, I never was revealing, like, I hope not, in a gratuitous way. It was always, if I thought I admitted something that I thought was generic. And like, one of the things that I think is the hardest thing to do is to take yourself seriously. And I have a story in the book about when I didn't take myself seriously and the learning from it. It just so happens, and I'll end with this story, but I went to high school with Nancy Pelosi. We did 9th, 10th, and 11th and 12th grade together. Her husband was my classmate at Georgetown. I did theater with him. The answer to a Trivial Pursuit question is, what 2 graduates of the Institute of Notre Dame went to Washington in 1958? And Nancy went to Trinity College and I went to Georgetown. And before she was in Congress, I was in California once, and I called her up, and I was talking about what I was doing. She was at that time the chair of the Democratic Party for the state of California. You have to understand, her father had been a very beloved mayor of Baltimore. He had been in Congress. He had been the deputy director of HUD. So, and she is the youngest and only girl with 6 boys in front of her. So she, when she was raising her own children, was very involved, still in politics, because she had learned that at her mother and dad's knee, and also very involved in social justice issues. Anyway, I called her up, and she suggested I call the person who was then the head of the Institute of Medicine. And because she thought that what I was doing he could be helpful to me. And she said, just gave me his phone number. She said, go call him up. I thought, you got to be kidding, Nancy. This guy is not going to want to talk to me. I never called him up. And I compare myself in the chapter with Afaf Malise, who, if any of you know Afaf, grew up in Egypt. Her mother was the first doctorally prepared nurse in Egypt. The University of Cairo would only take you when you were 16. When she was 15, she successfully convinced university officials that 15 was really 16 in the Arabic way of counting. She came over to get a master's degree, and this was a time when Nasser was the head of the government. He was not letting nuclear physicists out of the country, and she was engaged to one. So unbeknownst to her fiance, she writes Nasser saying, let my fiance go. and her fiance gets called with a note with Nasser saying, take, to whoever his boss was, let him go. and I compare in the book those two stories because I've already talked a little bit more about my background. And so for leadership, admitting that it took a while to take myself seriously, and yet Afaf in her own, she had so many stories where she took herself seriously that I'm not surprised that right now she takes herself very seriously. And I take myself very seriously. But for me, it was a longer journey because I grew up much more in tenement living where there's a certain fatalism, being the first generation, and I grew up really without role models of other than nuns who then went on to do anything. I didn't know anybody like that, and so it took a while for me to be convinced. And to get back to your question, it takes a while for a person, if you're writing a book, to decide how much you're going to reveal of yourself. And so it was not easy to write the book. There's still a lot of secrets I have that nobody knows. But how to sort of talk about how to use your own experience. And this gets back to phenomenology. I do think that the book does take the lived experience and trying to use, which is a key concept within women's health literature, to try to sort of look at your experience for what is the underneath truth to something that then can help people understand something better. But I really do think, particularly the first in your family to go to college, if you didn't know anybody who even did stuff, it's the rare person who doesn't then need some time to take yourself seriously. And I think, again, we're a gendered profession with a lot of still leftover stereotypes. And let's just say they don't sometimes make it easy to take yourself seriously. I've resolved this problem. I actually take myself quite seriously with a lot of humor, because what is it? Maybe what I really do is I now take my work seriously, even more so, myself still with a little humor, because the work I now know is never going to get done if I don't take my own self seriously.
Angela, thank you so much for being